I knew something was off when my daughter told me not to hurry home. It was a Sunday, and Sunday at my house had run the same way for years now, even after my wife died, and the numbers around the table got thinner. I'd get up before 7. Shove slow drink the first half of my coffee standing at the kitchen counter, then make a short list for the hardware store if anything in the house had started acting up. That morning it was faucet washers for the upstairs bath and a box of those white furnace filters I liked better than the cheap blue ones. Claire had called while I was backing my old Ford out of the driveway. "Dad, if they're out of the coffee filters, I like just get whatever," she said. I told her I already knew which kind she bought. She laughed, but it was one of those little breath laughs people use when they're trying to sound easy. "Right. Sure. And don't rush back. We're still getting everything together over here." Over here. It was my house. Claire had a place in Westerville with her husband and boys. But for the last year or so, she'd taken to saying, "over here," whenever she was at my place ahead of me, as if presence and ownership were cousins. Usually, I let it slide. A man can spend a lot of time in his 70s deciding what is worth correcting and what only makes you sound old. Still, after I hung up, I sat a second longer in the truck with my hand on the wheel. Claire had been coming by early on Sundays ever since she decided family dinners would be easier if she helped me stay ahead of things. She said it kindly. Everybody said things kindly now. That was part of what made it hard to answer. Kindness has a lot of room inside it for rearranging a man's life. I drove to Miller's Hardware on Cleveland Avenue. Same bell over the door, same smell of rubber hose, motor oil, and old pine shelving. Harlan Miller's grandson was working the register in a sweatshirt with the sleeves shoved up, though the day was already warming into one of those late April Ohio Sundays where the morning still had a little chill under it. I found my washers, the filters, and a packet of tomato steaks I didn't need but bought anyway because Ellen used to say I could not go into a hardware store and come out with only what I planned on. That thought hit me the way it sometimes still did quietly in the ribs. 6 years gone, and I still reached for comments to bring home to her. Across the street at Dot's Diner, I took a stool by the window and ordered coffee in a heavy white mug and 2 eggs over medium with rye toast. Church people were already starting to come in, men in sport coats and women in spring cardigans carrying that after-service brightness like they'd just stepped out of polished wood and hymnals. I wasn't much for organized religion anymore, but Sunday still had its rhythms. Claire knew that. She knew Sunday dinner mattered because it was the one thing that still made the house sound like itself by late afternoon. Chairs moving, oven door opening, somebody asking where the butter dish went when it had sat in the same place for 22 years. I looked at my phone while I waited on the check. No new message. Then one came through from Claire. "Take your time, Dad. We're handling it." I read that twice. We're handling it. It was a small thing. Could have been about the roast, could have been about the boys, could have been about the iced tea she always made too sweet, but the words sat wrong. I put cash on the counter, nodded to Dot, and walked out with that old low feeling in my chest I'd gotten too familiar with since Ellen passed. Not grief exactly, not anymore. More like the sensation that pieces of my life were being discussed in rooms I hadn't entered yet. The drive home took 20 minutes if traffic on 161 behaved. I passed the Methodist church, with the white steeple, the gas station, where the price board always looked like it was arguing with itself, and the stretch of ranch houses with basketball hoops over the garages and wind-bent flags hung from front porches. By the time I turned onto my street, I had talked myself back down. Claire was under pressure. Scott's accounting firm had cut bonuses the year before. The boys ate like hired men. People said careless things when they were juggling too much. I'd spent half my adult life smoothing rough edges for other people, first in business and then at home. It was a habit by then. Maybe a flaw. My house sat halfway down the block under a sugar maple just starting to leaf out, white siding, black shutters. Ellen picked porch swing on the right side. 2 azalea bushes by the front steps that never quite agreed with each other. One always bloomed fuller than the other, no matter what I did. Claire's SUV was already in the drive, and Scott's sedan was tucked behind it. Nothing strange there. What was strange was the bag. It sat on the porch bench beside the old brass planter, upright, zipped my brown overnight bag with the worn handle and the scrape mark on one corner from when Daniel dropped it in Indianapolis back in 2009. For a second, I honestly thought Claire must have brought it over from the hall closet for some church donation pile, or one of the boys had been playing with it. Then I saw my navy windbreaker folded on top of it. I parked crooked. Didn't realize it till later. I got out with the hardware sack in one hand and the diner coffee in the other. The porch boards gave that same familiar creak under my boot's third plank from the left. The bag looked more personal with every step, less like a mistake and more like a sentence somebody had already written for me. I set the coffee down on the bench and touched the handle. Heavy. Packed. I did not unzip it right away. I'm not sure why. Maybe because I already knew enough, and a man can delay certain kinds of knowing for a breath or two if he wants. The front door was shut, but I could hear movement inside. Cabinet door, silverware. Claire's voice lower than usual, saying something I couldn't make out. Then one of the boys laughed and got hushed fast. I punched in my keypad code. Red light. I stared at it, then punched it again slower. Same 6 digits I'd used since Ellen first talked me into the electronic deadbolt because she was tired of carrying keys in from the garden. Red again. That got still inside me in a way anger doesn't. Anger at least has heat in it. This was colder. I tried the knob out of habit, knowing already what I'd find. Locked. The door opened before I knocked. Claire stepped out and closed it behind her with one hand still on the inside knob. She had on jeans and a pale blue sweater and Ellen's old pearl studs, the small ones she used to wear for Easter lunch or dinner at the country club when somebody else was paying. Claire had started wearing more of Ellen's things in the last year. I had never figured out whether that comforted me or bothered me. "Dad," she said softly, like I was in a doctor's office. "You're back." I looked at her, then at the bag, then at the door behind her. "Looks that way." She pressed her lips together and glanced once toward the driveway, not at me. "Why don't we just sit down out here for a minute? Out here. It's nicer if we keep this calm." I let that sit between us. The hardware sack had gone heavy in my hand. I set it down by the planter. "My code doesn't work." Claire gave a small nod, like we were acknowledging weather. "I changed it this morning. I waited for the rest." "It's temporary," she said. "Before you get upset, I need you to hear me all the way through." I almost laughed then, not because anything was funny, but because when your own daughter tells you not to get upset while standing between you and your front door, a laugh is sometimes the only thing that keeps a worse sound from coming out. "Claire," I said, "why is my bag packed?" Her eyes dipped to it for half a second, then back to me. "You'll have what you need for a few nights where, at my place, or Daniel's, if that works out better. We just think we—" That landed harder than I meant it to, and she straightened a little. "We all think," she said carefully, "that some structure would help right now." Behind her shoulder, through the beveled glass strip by the door, I could see movement crossing my foyer. Someone had moved the umbrella stand. It sat nearer the stairs than it used to. Little things jump at you when the big thing is already bad enough. "What exactly is going on in my house?" I asked. "In your home," she said quickly, with a correction so fast it was almost insulting. "This is still your home." Nobody's saying otherwise. But I'm standing on the porch. "Dad, please don't make this harder." There it was. Not "what are you feeling?" Not "let me explain." "Don't make this harder." As if difficulty had come from me, not the changed code in the packed bag, and the fact that my own daughter was using her body to block my doorway on a Sunday afternoon. A car turned into the driveway behind my truck. Tom Eberly stepped out from behind the wheel of his silver Buick, smoothing his tie before he even shut the door. Family attorney. Went to high school with my younger brother. Had drawn up half the wills in our county and wore his concern like starch. He looked from Claire to me to the bag on the bench, and there wasn't 1 second of surprise on his face. That was when I knew whatever this was had started before I got home. Tom gave me the same careful face undertakers use when they are about to guide a family toward a nicer casket than they can afford. "Walt," he said, climbing the porch steps with one hand on the rail, "let's keep everything calm." I looked at him, then at Claire. "You bring a lawyer to Sunday dinner often?" Claire's jaw tightened, but only for a second. Tom was already coming by. "For roast beef, Dad." That soft, warning way she said it took me back 40 years in one ugly little flash. Claire, at 13, standing in the kitchen in her school jumper while Ellen tried to explain why she could not go to the lake with 3 older girls whose parents we barely knew. Claire had looked at her mother with that same tight mouth and said, "You always decide first and explain second." Ellen had gone quiet then because when Claire felt cornered, she did not cry or yell. She arranged herself. Even as a girl, she had known how to make defiance look like composure. Tom stopped beside the bench near enough to the bag that his pant leg brushed the side of it. "Why don't we all just sit down inside and talk this through?" I looked at the door. He had just said I ought to go through. "My code doesn't work." "That's temporary," Claire said again. Tom gave a small nod as if that settled the matter. "Claire's been worried about you. Then Claire should try speaking to me instead of locking me out." There was a pause after that, and in the pause I heard silverware inside again. A drawer sliding shut. Somebody moving chairs in the dining room. Normal sounds. That was the part that turned my stomach. They had managed to make the inside of my own house sound like a place I was expected to approach by appointment. Tom lowered his voice. "Walt, nobody is trying to take anything from you. This is just a short-term adjustment while everyone gets on the same page." Everyone. Another word that had no business doing that much damage. I had spent 6 years since Ellen's death learning the difference between solitude and being slowly edged out. Solitude, at least, is honest. You go to bed in an empty room and you know where you stand. But being edged out comes dressed as help. Claire bringing over casseroles I hadn't asked for. Claire telling the boys not to leave their bikes in my garage because Grandpa liked order, though it had been Claire, not me, who decided my garage needed organizing. Claire answering questions about my blood pressure before I'd open my mouth. Small things. Things a man talks himself out of minding, not because he is blind, because he is tired, because his wife is gone and his daughter is close by, and some nights the sound of somebody else in the kitchen, even if she opens the wrong drawers, is better than hearing the refrigerator cycle on and off in a silent house. I picked up my coffee from the bench. It had gone cooler than I liked. "What exactly are we talking through?" Claire glanced at Tom, and that was answer enough. Tom opened the slim folder in his hands. "There have been some concerns about routine decision-making, day-to-day management of the property." "The property," I said. He paused. "The house. You started with property." Claire stepped in, then using the voice she used on her boys when they were about to say something rude in public. "Dad, this isn't an attack." No. It's about making things safer and more manageable. You've had a lot on your plate. The upstairs bathroom leak went 3 weeks before you fixed it. I bought the washers this morning. That's not the point. Seems real close to the point. The screen on the storm door caught a flash of movement behind her. One of my grandsons, Mason maybe, was peeking from the hallway. Claire turned without looking and snapped her fingers low by her thigh, and he disappeared. She did it without thinking. A practiced motion. The kind you only get by running a room often. That stirred something hot in me. "Who packed the bag?" I asked. Claire crossed her arms. "I did. Not Scott. Not one of the boys. Not some emergency helper. Claire." She must have seen something in my face then because her own changed. For half a second she looked less organized and more like my child. Tired around the eyes. Defensive. Maybe even ashamed. But she held the line. "I didn't want this to be messy," she said. That sentence sat there between us, and I understood 2 things at once. First, that she had thought about my things. Underwear, pills, toothbrush, sleeping clothes. She had opened drawers in my bedroom and decided what version of me would be sufficient for a few nights elsewhere. Second, that she had done it before I got home. Tom cleared his throat. Walt, the practical issue right now is easing transition. Transition to what Claire answered before he could. To some support. To not doing everything alone. To letting people help before there's a crisis. A little grey Honda pulled up at the curb then, and Daniel got out, my son, still in jeans and a Buckeyes quarter-zip, like he'd driven in straight from his place near Delaware. He saw the three of us on the porch, the bag Tom's folder, and stopped with the car door still open. "What the hell's this?" he said. Claire turned sharp. "Daniel, lower your voice." He shut the car door harder than necessary and came up the walk. "Dad." "I'm fine," I said, automatically. That was my first reflex every time. Fine. Even when I wasn't. Even when Ellen was in chemo and people asked in grocery aisles with those two bright faces whether we were holding up. Fine was a shield that got lighter the more you used it and protected less. Daniel looked at the locked door, then at the bag again. "Why's his stuff outside?" "Nobody put his stuff outside," Claire said. "It's a temporary arrangement. Looks outside from here." Tom tried the peacemaker tone with him. "Daniel, emotions are high." Daniel gave a short, humorless laugh. "Mine just started." For the first time since I'd pulled into the driveway, I felt the ground under me steady, half an inch. Not because Daniel would fix it. He wouldn't. Daniel had never liked friction enough for that. But because somebody else had now seen the thing as it was, without all the smoothing words laid over it. Claire folded her arms tighter. "I'm trying to keep Dad from getting overwhelmed." I looked at her. "By what?" "My own front door." She shut her eyes for a second. "This is what I mean. Everything turns into a fight with you now. That one got me not because it was true, but because it was the kind of line that only works if it has been said before to other people. Casual, prepared, the sort of sentence relatives nod along with because it sounds like background knowledge. My house key was still in my pocket. I could feel it there against my thigh like a useless tooth. A month earlier, maybe 5 weeks, I had been sitting at the dining room table with the spring tax packet and the trust statements spread out in front of me. Ellen had wanted the house and the investment account wrapped into a family trust after her sister's probate turned into a 6-month knife fight in Kentucky. "People get strange when grief meets paperwork," she used to say. At the time, I thought she was being dramatic. Ellen had the better instincts between us in most matters involving family and weather. That morning at the table, I had seen something odd in the quarterly summary. A request notation attached to the renovation reserve sub-account. Not large, but not routine. Then a draft amendment language line I hadn't authorized. Nothing had gone through. It was one of those things a careless man might miss or a trusting man might. I called Marianne Doyle at the bank the next morning. She was exact, which I appreciated. No syrup in her voice. No pretending a concern wasn't one. "Mr. Brennan, she had told me I'd recommend you suspend discretionary disbursements and lock amendments until you've reviewed all recent inquiries in person." I drove down there in my work jacket and signed the freeze order myself. At the time, I told myself it was prudence. Ellen would have wanted prudence. I did not let my mind go where it wanted to go after Marianne mentioned that most inquiries had come through from someone presenting herself as helping coordinate household matters. I did not ask the name. Maybe I knew why. Standing on my porch now, looking at Claire's face, I hated the old man in me that had preferred suspicion in silence to truth out loud. Daniel had gone quiet, which for him meant he was finally paying full attention. Tom was still holding the folder, but not opening it again. Claire kept glancing past me toward the street as if willing the scene to look ordinary to passing neighbors. "I'm going to my truck," I said. Claire moved half a step. "Dad, no. We need to finish this. We haven't started." Tom tried again. "Walt, let's not make any decisions in the heat of the moment." I looked at him. That advice might have been useful before somebody packed my bag. Then I picked up the hardware sack and the coffee and walked back down the steps. Nobody stopped me. I don't think they thought they needed to. That was part of it too. They thought the hard part was already done. Inside the truck with the door shut, the world changed shape a little. Porch voices blurred. Sun hit the windshield. I set the coffee in the cup holder and took out my phone. My hand shook once when I pulled up Marianne Doyle's number, then steadied. She answered on the third ring. Marianne Doyle. It's Walt Brennan. A beat. Mr. Brennan, I need you to remind me of something. I watched Claire through the windshield as she stood on the porch with her arms folded, Tom beside her, Daniel off to the side, looking like a man who had walked into the wrong church basement meeting. The trust freeze. Date and scope. Her voice turned even cleaner. One moment. Papers moved on her end. Discretionary distributions suspended and amendments frozen 23 days ago. Effective immediately upon signature. No release since. I shut my eyes. 23 days. Older than whatever was happening on that porch. Were there further inquiries after that, I asked. Yes, she said. Would you like names? I opened my eyes and looked at my daughter through the windshield. No, I said. I know the name. When I ended the call, the truck was quiet in a way that made every small sound matter. Turn signal clicking somewhere on the street. A dog barking 2 houses down. My own breathing. Then my phone screen lit again with an older voicemail I had saved without thinking much about it at the time. Claire's voice from 2 weeks before when I had missed her call while mowing. Dad, call me back when you get a chance. We need to get ahead of some paperwork stuff. Once you're out of the day-to-day over there, the rest is mostly paperwork anyway. At the time, I had heard it as efficiency. Claire being Claire. Now I heard the order of it. Once you're out. I sat there with that line in my ear and felt something in me go from hurt to shape. Not rage. Rage is sloppy. This was clearer than that. This was the sound a bolt makes when it slides clean into place. She had not panicked this morning and done a bad thing. She had been walking toward this. I looked down at the manila copy of the freeze order still tucked in the glove box where I'd left it after the bank, because some part of me must have known I was not done needing it. When I stepped out of the truck again, I took the paper with me. Claire was still on the porch. This time I did not feel locked out. I felt armed. Claire watched the paper in my hand before she looked at my face. What's that? She asked. Something we should have talked about before you packed my bag. Tom shifted beside her. Walt, I really think I know what you think I said. That's been the problem all afternoon. I walked up the porch steps not fast, just steady. And for the first time since I got home, neither of them moved to block the door. Daniel stepped aside from the railing and looked at the paper, then at me, the way men do when they realize the room has changed shape and they haven't caught up yet. Claire put a hand on the knob behind her. Dad, not out here. No, I said. Inside. That landed. I saw it in her face. Not because I'd raised my voice. I hadn't. But because I said it like a man returning to his own house instead of asking admission to it. She opened the door. The hallway smelled like roast beef onions, and that lemon furniture polish Claire always used too much. My grandsons were gone from sight now, likely sent upstairs. Scott stood in the dining room with his hands in his pockets, trying on a polite expression that didn't fit him. My sister-in-law Bev was at the kitchen counter with a casserole dish frozen in the act of laying down a spoon. Nobody looked at me like a man who had just come home. They looked at me like weather had turned on them. I set the hardware sack on the foyer table beneath the mirror Ellen had insisted was too narrow for that wall and perfect anyway. The overnight bag was still outside on the bench. I left it there on purpose. Tom closed the door behind us and tried to recover his tone. Maybe we should all sit down. That's the first decent idea I've heard today, I said. We went into the family room. The Sunday afternoon light came in slantwise through the back windows across Ellen's rug and the arm of the blue chair she used to claim before anybody else could. Claire had moved things in here too. Not much, That was her style. A lamp shifted closer to the sofa. A side table pulled where my chair should have had more room. My recliner, the one I'd sat in every evening for 6 winters since Ellen died, had been angled away from the center of the room like a seat at the edge of somebody else's conversation. I took that chair anyway. Nobody said anything for a moment. The silence did more work than talking would have. Tom held his folder on his knee. Claire sat upright on the sofa cushion nearest the coffee table, hands linked too tight. Scott took the armchair by the fireplace. Daniel stayed standing until he saw me settle in. Then he pulled one of the dining chairs from the wall and sat off to the side, cap folded in his hands. Claire drew a breath. "Dad, I know this feels upsetting." I looked at her. "Feels," she swallowed. "I'm trying to be careful." "No," I said. "You're trying to be clean." That took some color out of her face. Tom stepped in. "Mr. Brennan, the concern here is simply your well-being and whether some short-term support." "Before you go another inch farther," I said, "I want to ask one thing so everybody hears it at the same time." He stopped. I turned to Claire. "When did you decide I was leaving my own house tonight?" She blinked. "That's not what this is." "When?" "Dad, please. When did you open my drawers and decide which underwear I needed for being removed from my own home?" Bev looked down. Scott shifted. Daniel's jaw tightened. Claire's voice came out thinner. "You're making it sound ugly. It was ugly when you zipped the bag." Tom cleared his throat, but he didn't say anything this time. I laid the paper on the coffee table between us. Claire glanced at it and then away too quickly. "That," I said, "is a freeze order on the Brennan Family Trust." Nobody moved. Tom frowned and leaned forward half an inch. "What I signed it 23 days ago." Claire stared at me now, and for the first time all day I saw something under the smoothness that looked like plain fear. I kept my voice level. Discretionary distributions suspended, amendments frozen. Nothing moves without me, not the renovation reserve, not tax support, not household supplements, nothing. Scott sat up straight. "Claire." She didn't answer him. She kept looking at me. "Why would you do that?" I almost smiled at the nerve of the question, because I read my own paperwork. Tom reached for the page. I let him. He put on his glasses and scanned it, and I watched his face change by degrees. Not shock first, annoyance, then professional caution, then the understanding that he had been brought into a room under one set of assumptions, and those assumptions had just broken under his shoes. "There must be some misunderstanding," Claire said too quickly. "No," I said. "The misunderstanding was yours." Scott looked from her to me. "Claire, did you know about this?" She turned toward him, offended now, which told me plenty. "Of course I didn't know about it." Daniel spoke for the first time since we came in. Sounds like Dad was still handling his own affairs after all. Claire shot him a look. "Oh, don't start." "Start," Daniel said. I walked up to find his bag on the porch. Tom set the paper down carefully. "Walt, if this is valid, then any present assumption about access to trust-backed support would need to be revisited." "That's one way to put it," I said. Claire stood up. "This is unbelievable. You did this behind everybody's back. Everybody." There was that word again. I leaned back in my own chair and looked at her standing in my family room, wearing Ellen's pearl studs, speaking as if I'd committed some breach against a committee. "I did it without asking permission," I said. "That's different." She folded her arms. "I was trying to help you. I took out my phone." I think she knew before I hit play. Maybe not the exact thing, but the danger of hearing your own voice after a room has already started turning against you. "Dad, don't," she said. I pressed it anyway. Her voice came into the room small and tinny from the speaker, but clear enough. "Dad, call me back when you get a chance." We need to get ahead of some paperwork stuff. Once you're out of the day-to-day over there, the rest is mostly paperwork anyway. I let the silence after it breathe. Nobody rushed to fill it. Scott looked at her as if he had never heard her speak before. Bev sat down hard on the edge of the love seat. Daniel just stared at the floor for a second, then lifted his eyes to Claire with something in them I hadn't seen since they were both young and he caught her taking money from my dresser for a school trip she hadn't asked about. Claire's mouth opened once and closed. That's not what I meant. Then, what did you mean? I asked. She looked around the room for help and found none ready enough to take the risk. I meant the paperwork around support, around making things simpler. Simpler for who? For everybody. No, I said. For you. My phone buzzed in my hand, then right on cue, though I hadn't planned it that way. Marianne Doyle, returning the follow-up message I'd left after our first call. I answered and put her on speaker before Claire could get her balance back. Mr. Brennan, Marianne said, her voice cool and precise. You asked me to confirm trust status. You're on speaker in my family room, I said. Please do. Certainly. The Brennan family trust was frozen at your instruction 23 days ago. All discretionary distributions and all amendment activity were suspended at that time. No releases have been approved since. Several subsequent inquiries were denied pursuant to your order. Tom took off his glasses. Claire sat back down, like her knees had lost interest in helping her. Marianne continued, If anyone has represented otherwise, that would be inaccurate. Thank you, I said. When I ended the call, the room felt different from any room I'd sat in for years. Not warmer, not happier. Just honest in a way it hadn't been an hour earlier. Claire looked at me with her eyes bright now, though she was trying hard to keep them dry. You could have just talked to me. That one hurt because part of it was true and part of it was upside down. I tried for years, I said. Just not in speeches, in small ways, when you answered for me, when you started calling this place over here, when you moved things and framed it as helping. When every question about my life started sounding like a decision already made. She shook her head. That's not fair. No, I said. Packing my bag was not fair. The words came out quiet, and that was what finally did it. Not the paper, not Marianne, not the voicemail. That sentence said plain. Claire looked down at her hands. Scott rubbed once at his mouth, and then stopped, as if he had decided this was not a room where he got to rescue himself. Daniel unfolded his cap, folded it again. Tom stood. I think I'm going to leave. Good, I said. He hesitated, then gave the smallest nod a man can give when he knows he's been standing on the wrong side of something and is too old to pretend otherwise. He picked up his folder and let himself out without another word. Bev rose after him, mumbling something about checking the roast. Scott stayed seated a second longer, then stood too. Claire, he said quietly. We'll talk at home. That left the three of us for a moment. Me in my chair. Claire on the sofa under the framed family photo from 2 Thanksgivings ago. Daniel with his elbows on his knees looking older than he had when he walked in. I'm not throwing you out, I said to Claire. Not because I can't. Because I won't do to my child what she just tried to do to me. But dinner is over. For today. She looked up at that. The sentence hit her in the place she'd been hitting me all afternoon, the place where belonging lives. Dad, take the boys home. Her lips trembled once, then steadied. She nodded and stood. When she passed me, she stopped like she might put a hand on my shoulder. She didn't. Maybe that was for the best. Some touches come too late and ask for more than they offer. Daniel lingered after she left. She packed his bag. I heard Mason ask in the hallway, not meaning me to hear it. Nobody answered him. Daniel looked toward the door, then back at me. You want me to stay? I considered it. The truth was, I wanted Ellen. Failing that, I wanted quiet. No, I said. Come by tomorrow, if you mean it. He nodded. I do. After the cars were gone and the house had settled into itself again, I went out and brought the overnight bag in. I carried it upstairs, set it on the bed, and unzipped it. Pajamas, pills, a clean shirt, underwear folded too neatly, my electric razor. She'd packed the right things. That was part of what made it sting. I put everything back where it belonged. Much later, after the roast had cooled and the dishwasher hummed and dusk turned the windows into dark squares, I took a paper cup of coffee out to the porch. Not fresh brewed. Diner coffee I'd reheated in the microwave, which Ellen always said ruined the soul of it. The porch swing creaked under my weight. The light above me was on, same as she used to leave it until everybody was home. I took the house key from my pocket and set it on the painted armrest beside the cup. All afternoon it had felt like judgment, proof, loss. Now it was only metal. Out in the yard, the azaleas were starting to go dim in the last light, one fuller than the other, as if some things in this world were simply built to bloom uneven and still be counted as a pair. I sat there until the coffee went lukewarm and the neighborhood got quiet enough to hear a screen door close 2 houses down. I was still in my own home. It did not feel like victory exactly. It felt better than that. It felt true.